Good morning, Ramesh.
Morning, Mr.
Yesterday you talked about the journey of the spiritual seeker.
Yes.
Today I would like to ask you questions on the event of the understanding itself, the event of enlightenment.
Yes.
I know in the course of these interviews you've said it many times, but I'd like to ask you again, in the simplest possible terms,
Yes.
what is enlightenment?
Enlightenment or self-realization, according to my concept, that means self-realization first is a concept. According to my concept, self-realization is the realization, total realization, that no one is a doer. everything happens through a particular body-mind organism, through the primal energy functioning through every body-mind organism and bringing about whatever is supposed to happen according to God's will, or if you can say according to a cosmic law. In other words, there is no action done by any individual doer. What seems to be an apparent action is truly nothing more than a happening brought about by the primal energy according to a cosmic law. My concept, self-realization, that total acceptance. No one is a doer, neither me nor anybody else.
Right. And by the same token, in your experience, what are the most common misconceptions about enlightenment or self-realization?
The basic misconception is that it is up to the individual to work hard along a particular path and achieve self-realization without truly knowing what self-realization is going to do for the achiever. That is the biggest misconception.
I've heard you say in your talks, and I think I've read it in your books as well, you give a rather strange recommendation to spiritual seekers. You say that if someone wants $1 million
Yes.
and enlightenment,
Yes.
take the $1 million now, because at least there'll be someone around to enjoy it. Could
Yes.
you comment on that?
Yes. Because when the understanding happens, there will be no one to enjoy anything. Enjoyment may happen. Enjoyment may not happen. If you have asked, in other words, what I'm saying is, if you had the choice of seeking, I don't, according to you don't, but if you had the choice of seeking $1 million or self-realization, choose the $1 million, because then you will be able to enjoy the minimum $1 million and whatever the $1 million might bring you. Self-realization, if you seek self-realization, then my point, it is easier to seek and get $1 million than to seek and get self-realization.
And why is that?
Because self-realization is not something to be achieved by anybody by doing anything. Yes.
Right. Ramesh, I think many spiritual seekers
Yes.
are often seen as a crowd of very selfish people. That they appear to their relatives, their friends, to the outside world as people who are far too self-involved. In the midst of the suffering and the pain that all of us recognize and see in the world today, is enlightenment, is the seeking for self-realization a selfish goal? And is it possible to enjoy the fruits of it if it happens when the world is in such a chaos?
Good question, Murthy. The basis of this question is, I said, if you had the choice to seek $1 million, extremely selfish. And the question is, if I seek self-realization for myself, is it not equally selfish? The one who gets $1 million may give half of it in charity. Is he not doing a better job of his life than someone seeking self-realization? He gets self-realization. What does he get self-realization? Peace and harmony in his daily living. Again, a selfish motive. More selfish than someone who shares his $1 million. So ultimately the question is, if someone seeks self-realization, has the total understanding, which makes him anchored in peace and harmony while living his daily life from moment to moment. The question really is, in living his daily life from moment to moment, does he not see how much suffering there is in the world? Therefore, how can he enjoy that peace and harmony in daily living when he knows that the world is suffering so much? That's the question, isn't it? In other words, the question is, if you had the choice, is it not better to be a Mother Teresa or a Father Teresa than being a Ramana Maharshi? That's what it comes down to, isn't it? Is it not better? In fact, the question would truly come from what is known as a do-gooder, social activist. Question would come from a social activist. Is it not better to strive to reduce the suffering in the world rather than seeking peace and harmony for yourself alone? That is the point. So my point, there are two aspects to it. One, I think some American billionaire, I forget who, someone came to him. You have so many millions, you are selfish, this, that and the other. So he took out his calculator, calculated, and he gave him his 1/4. Quarter. This is your share of my wealth distributed among all the population of the world. Now keep quiet. This is your share of my property. So my point is, the suffering of the world, it is impossible for the suffering in the world to be removed. I say impossible. For this reason, the very existence of the manifestation and its functioning, the basis of the manifestation and its functioning is the existence at any time of the interconnected opposites. According to the society, the sage and the sinner, the millionaire and the pauper, and in between various kinds of suffering due to money and otherwise. So my point is, I cannot imagine a single moment in the history of time when there was no suffering. Therefore, my point is, suffering, one kind or another, for some people or the other, is an essential point of the very existence. Therefore, you cannot remove suffering as such. How much suffering will be removed from whom? God has already decided. Therefore, in a word, what I would say exactly what Ramana Maharshi said. God created the world, let him look after the world. In the meantime, I would add, my own addition to this advice is, I see the suffering, I feel for the suffering, then I would say, is there something I can do at the moment to relieve at least some of the suffering? If there is, I would do it. And from that point of view, if I see someone suffering in my immediate neighborhood, I would certainly try to help him. Otherwise, I would see that I have which I have already been doing for quite some time. From my income, I give something towards suitable charities. There is a help age for the older people, CRY, child rehabilitation and youth. So there are 2 or 3 like that. So every year I send them something according to mine, which is fairly adequate. Having done that, I leave the rest of the suffering in the world to God who created it. Having left the suffering as well as the enjoyment, whatever it is, to God who created it, I feel I have no more obligation to anybody, including God. That's my simple way of looking at the suffering in the world. Basically, it comes, is there something I can do in the moment? If so, I do it. And a typical example of this, I've already stated, is the seals being washed ashore and people hitting them on the head, killing them for their skins. J. Krishnamurti saw it, couldn't bear it, he on record, and he switched off the TV. Bridget Bardot, when she saw it, just couldn't sleep a wink that night. Next morning, she started a movement which gathered impetus so quickly that she had the practice banned by the government concerned. So my point is, for someone who is sensitive enough to feel the suffering of the world, then my point is, instead of wailing and about the suffering in the world, why has God produced income? Why does God produce handicapped children? Why does God do this? Why does God do that? The answer of which we can never ever know. Instead of that, the only answer is there something you can do? Do it. Then leave everything to God who created it. That is one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is, in life, no one, according to my concept, can choose what he would do. Whether he would choose money, or whether he would seek self-realization for himself, or he would be a do-gooder and a social activist. My basic point is, no one has any choice about doing whatever in his life. That is dictated by the programming in his body-mind organism and his own personal destiny according to the cosmic law. In other words, my basic point is, all that anyone can do is to let life flow and go with the flow. That is my final conclusion to it. Let life flow and go with the flow.
Just continuing with this point of the suffering in the world, Ramesh, could
Yes.
you describe your own personal reaction in the moment when you saw the planes hit the World Trade Center? What actually went on in your body-mind?
Horror. I saw it on the TV, and curiously, as they advertise, such as again, live. We saw the second explosion live, Sharda and I. First had already happened, and the commentator was later. And when we saw it, we saw the plane hitting on one side and the explosion on the other side. Saw it live. For a moment, truly, I wondered if some movie scene is being enacted. Then when I knew it wasn't, horrible sense of horror. You see? And then immediately, is there something I can do? Question, nothing I can do. You see? Therefore I was with her. But the thought did come to my mind. What next? First Hitler, World War II, atom bomb, Pearl Harbor, dropping of the atom bomb on Hiroshima, now the 11th of September. What next? Only God knows. That thought did arise. Now see, another kind of suffering during this, what is now known as the Kargil War, you know, between India and Pakistan. During the coldest winter months, the Pakistan occupied the top ranges in a particular area called Kargil. And when the warmer weather happened, they started shooting people in the valley. And thereafter the war started. The Pakistanis had occupied the best positions and were just sitting there and killing the Indian soldiers who were dumb like sitting ducks. So we could see that also, the soldiers being slaughtered. You see. At that time, suddenly, I didn't even ask myself, can I do something about it? I didn't, because I know I couldn't go there and fight. But India had to win the war, you see. How can they win the war with 80-year-old people going in? So what I did decide to do was to send a really big amount, and the figure also came to me. I said, I'll send 100,000 rupees to the army, they call army, whatever, help. So Shada was there. I said, Shada, do you know what I'm going to send them a check for 100,000 rupees. Shada said, how much? I said, 100,000 rupees. She said, good. So, I went, wrote down the check, wrote a letter, put it in an envelope, and curiously, the same morning, there was an advertisement for this army relief. Check should be addressed to so and so, so and so. So promptly, I wrote the check, wrote a letter, put it in an envelope, stamped the envelope. All in 15 minutes, the cover was ready. And in half an hour, the cover was in the post. My job was done. After that, how much the suffering there is, nothing I can do about it. So for any suffering, that is my point. Instead of wailing and whining and complaining and thinking somebody should do something about it, which I think is one of the worst things. Somebody should do something about it. I'm concerned, is there something I can do? If there is, I do it. After that, I leave the matter, as Ramana Maharshi said, to God who created the world. Right. With that attitude, I don't suffer. Right. I'm not denying that there is suffering, because suffering is part of the functioning of manifestation or life as we know it. And my point is, there is a balance in the interconnected opposites. There is always a balance in the interconnected opposites. But the human being thinks from the point of view of the human being. I say no. The balance that God has to maintain is maintained for the universe as a whole. That is what now I'm told there are multi-universes. So the balance has to be maintained between multi-universes, beyond my wildest imagination. So for that balance to be maintained, I've always felt, for that balance in our universe to be maintained, if it is found that it is necessary to destroy a small planet in one solar system, in one universe, it will be done, it will happen. It will happen. Therefore, there is no point wasting my time in thinking about what would happen if the earth is destroyed. And my point is, we always thinking from the point of view of the human being, as if the human being is the only object on earth. That is not so. Therefore, I have always mentioned, when the smallpox germ was eliminated, great jubilation among the medical fraternity and the human being. The smallpox germ has been eliminated. And ever since I have wondered, what about the same event from the point of view of the smallpox germ? The smallpox germ has as much right to exist in this world as anything else. So my point is, whenever a human being thinks suffering or whatever, the human being thinks only from his own point of view.
So the spiritual seeker, as you've said, has no choice in the matter as to whether he became a spiritual seeker.
No, Mutribo, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is, no seeker thinking anything has any choice of being that kind of a seeker.
Right. In the case of a spiritual seeker,
Yes.
on the spiritual journey,
Yes.
what are the signs of progress in his journey? What are the clues that he might have or she might have
Yeah.
that the understanding is getting closer?
A certain amount of peace and harmony, a certain amount of being comfortable with oneself, comfortable with others. Negatively, which I prefer, hardly any time am I uncomfortable with myself, and I'm hardly ever uncomfortable with others. If that happens, to me, it's an enormous step towards what I call self-realization.
Is the event of self-realization gradual or sudden?
The happening of it is sudden. But there is a progress in most cases. It wasn't in the case of Ramana Maharshi. But in most cases, there is. Let me give you my usual example has been the spiritual seeker is like someone who is climbing a staircase, who is forced to climb a staircase. Why? He doesn't know why. Finds himself going up a staircase. He can't stop. But he doesn't know how many steps he has to go. All he can do is to keep on doing whatever he has been doing, which is climbing up the stairs. You see? So, it is a gradual process. But the final, supposing he had to get 50 steps. So the step from 49 to 50 has to be sudden. But he had to climb the 49 steps before the 50th step can happen. So the happening of the 50th step is always sudden. But the climbing up the 49 steps is a gradual process.
All concepts around spirituality try to talk of it in some way that many people can understand and relate to. But is the actual event of understanding unique in each body-mind in which it takes place? Are there any similarities in terms of how the understanding takes place in different body-minds?
No, it can happen any time, any place, without the slightest sign, without the slightest sign. But the various paths that have been, according to the Indian, some people start with what is known as bhakti. Bhakti means the body-mind organism, accepts totally that all there is he as one of this society and God who created the world. And the only way he can get salvation or whatever is to be constantly in touch with God and beg him to give him that freedom from life. That is the bhakti. In some other case, if his destination is yoga, he happens to find a master who is himself a yogi. So he turns to that master, takes up yoga. Or, in some case, the curiosity happens. What is all this about? What is life? What am I doing here? How did I get here? What am I supposed to be doing here? Am I just going through life as I have seen my father and grandfather do, and the end of it die? Is that all there is to life? So that kind of curiosity, questioning, begins, where the path is supposed to be jnana. And my point I would like to make it clear is, it is not an ironclad, iron-bound, different way. Anything, both can be together, or all three can happen together. So any of them, you go along, but my main point I'm saying is, it is the individual who thinks he wants to achieve freedom through one way or another. And very few times is there any seeker who has, what do I want freedom from? Somehow that escapes him. One is curiosity. I want to know the truth. What is the truth? What am I supposed to do here? But having thought about it, hardly anybody asks him, having found the truth, what am I going to do with it for the rest of my life? Having found the truth, I can't spread it on a toast and eat it. Having found that, what am I going to do with it? Having found the answers to all my questions, what am I going to do with it? The bhakta, having become one with God, I will still have to live the rest of my life doing whatever I have to do, doing my job, feeding my family. I cannot remain 24 hours being one with God. Having become one with God, what is it that is going to do for me in living the rest of my life? So whichever way, whatever you think of self-realization, the question, having got what I wanted by way of enlightenment of self, how, in what way is it going to help me to live the rest of my life? It's curious. Hardly anybody thinks on those lines. And that is why there's enormous frustration, confusion, frustration. Several people have come to me, admit it. 20 years, 30 years, I've been with this guru, or went for the worst suffering I've come across on this was a middle-aged lady in Joshua Tree, in desert, Californian desert. She was totally disoriented. Her story was, she suddenly appeared one morning at the seminar center. She hadn't booked, she had done nothing. She got down from the rest of it in the van which went to the bus stop to take them here. Everybody got out. The man in charge ticked off, your cabin in this one, your in such and such a trailer. Incidentally, there was someone in the trailer, everybody in a trailer. This man said, this is like being in a concentration camp. Wherever it is, they did get something. And there was this lady, and he said, totally disoriented. What are you, how are you? So ultimately, that the person in charge, what she did was, knowing that she was there, so then they came to an arrangement. She will help in the kitchen, she will help in the garden. She was prepared to help anywhere. So they made an arrangement. She will work some and attend the seminar. And then at that time, I was having a talk with every participant before the seminar began. So her story was this. I remember the name. April from New Zealand. April something. April from New Zealand. The moment she sat there and we started talking, she started weeping. And her story was this. In her own words, I left a perfectly wonderful husband and 3 wonderful children to go and join an ashram. Why? She didn't know. She felt forced to leave a perfectly wonderful husband and 3 perfectly wonderful children to suddenly go and join an ashram. In that ashram, her words again, I did everything I was supposed to do. I did not do one thing I was not supposed to do. Do's and don'ts, very conscientiously I did everything. And then after 3 or 4 years, nothing happened. Point is, she didn't know what was going on, but nothing happened. Point is, she expected something fantastic to happen. Nothing happened. So, she joined someone and both of them went to another ashram. So, the whole story was, she went to 3 or 4 ashrams. Everywhere the same story. She was there for 3 or 4 years, and each time the frustration and embarrassment made her mind was slowly being deteriorating until there was a total disorientation. In this particular incident, she said she was in Los Angeles, and she must have walked. She said, I must have walked all night. I was thoroughly exhausted. So I sat down at the first bench, seat or whatever he found. It turned out to be a seat where the bus stop was. So early in the morning, a bus came, and she was joined by several, 4, 5, 6 other people, many of them women. And then the bus came, and she said, along the others hustled me into the bus. She went in the bus. She didn't even have a handbag. So the lady sitting next to her assumed that she had lost, and she was restless. April was restless and a sort of totally not there. So the lady next to her assumed that she had lost her handbag, and therefore she was upset. So she said, the lady next to me paid for the ticket. And at the place where it was supposed, everybody got down, and the lady next to me pushed me out, and I stood there outside the bus stop in Joshua Tree along with the others. Then a van came from the seminar center. It was waiting there. So everybody got in there. I was again hustled into the van. And here I am. You see? And she was weeping all the time. And her refrain all the time was, I did everything I was supposed to do. I didn't do anything that I was not supposed to do. Why have I been reduced to this condition? Total frustration. So anyway, I gathered from her that she had made an arrangement that she will attend this seminar. 20 minutes that I had a talk with her, she was weeping all the time. And Sharda in the bedroom where we were staying, when she said, what a sorry tale. What a sorry tale. Then she started attending the seminars. First day, she lay down on her stomach, head on her arms, weeping all the time. Just weeping, not even listening to what was going on. Second day, she lifted her head and at least tried to listen to what was going on. Third day, she sat up and listened to the talk. Fourth day, she started asking intelligent questions based on her 10 years of frustration. Fifth day, she continued to ask questions, and people were surprised. And so in the last 2 or 3 days, she let other people ask questions, and he sat there giggling away. Others could see the transformation that was happening. So on the last day, again, I used to have a final talk with everybody. So she came, grinning away, totally happy, totally transformed person. So I asked her, April, now what are you going to do? The seminar is over. What are you going to do? She said, she gave a big laugh. And she said, Ramesh, honestly, I don't know. But something will happen. I don't know what it is. Something will happen. And I'm prepared to accept whatever happens. Such a transformation. So this going along a particular, she didn't even know why, as in her words, she left a perfectly wonderful husband, 3 perfectly wonderful children, and had to go to an ashram. She couldn't help it. It happened. Therefore, I always say, the seeking happens.
Ramesh, many teachers, many sages refer to self-realization as the death of the ego. Could you comment on that?
That was another problem I had to face for myself. Ramana Maharshi, others I wouldn't have cared so much. Ramana Maharshi, kill the ego. You have to kill the ego. And I said, what is the ego? To me, the basis of the ego is identification with a particular body-mind organism and a name as a separate entity. And I could say, I knew Ramana Maharshi lived for 50 years as a separate entity, deciding to construct small places in the ashram, directing the man on going about his work, arguing with him about what should be done, going to the kitchen and helping the cooks, perfectly ordinary separate entity. So there cannot be a separate entity. I'm thinking for myself. There cannot be a separate entity without the ego. How can the ego be killed? Then I came across a sentence, Ramana Maharshi. The ego of the sage is just a shadow of the real ego. He is helpless, like the remnants of a burnt rope. So I said, so kill the ego. Obviously, Ramana Maharshi and the other masters must have said, when they said kill the ego, they obviously meant destroy something in the ego. It's obvious. Destroy something in the ego. Ego has to be there. That I was convinced. So my inquiry started. What is it in the ego that is to be destroyed? And I came to the conclusion. It is the sense of personal doership. So I came across this, which is in the booklet, Infamous Ego. The ego is basically identification with a particular name and form as a separate entity. And yet, it is obvious that the basis of self-realization is the destruction of separation.
Ramesh, could you describe what actually happened in your case when the understanding happened? Could you describe the details of that event?
Yes, I came to the conclusion that it is the sense of personal doership which had to be destroyed, and not the ego and identification. And then it struck me that the sense of personal doership in my case was never there. somehow, even as far back as I can remember, it was my total acceptance, inherent acceptance. No one does anything. Everything happens according to the destiny of the individual. And whatever is going to happen has already happened. That was my... So when I saw... So I never really did have a sense of personal doership. Or rather, I knew that everything was happening. So from that point of view, that's where it sort of rested. Because remember Mutribo, I was never an active seeker. Never an active seeker. With this understanding, more like a curiosity. What is the difference between this ego and the killing of the ego and so all this whenever I had the time, I would read a book and carry on. So I was never an active seeker. But all that I had, the ultimate understanding, to some extent was already there. That I am not the doer in the sense that I cannot expect something because I have done something. Whatever I am going to get has already been decided according to my destiny. So with that feeling, my whole life was based entirely with that feeling. Therefore, as I mentioned earlier, preparing for an exam, I knew I would do it. After that, I knew what happened would never depend on anything I did or didn't do. So throughout my life, that has been my acceptance. And I've had my tough days too. As I say, one of the toughest, when at 22, it is tough to say that you are a graduate of the London School of Economics in Commerce and Banking and have to start as a clerk. But that's what happened. I was very reluctant. But my father was a wise man. He said, start it for a few days. And then I realized, having worked as a clerk helped me enormously in later years. This way, the officer who joined straight as an officer could not answer not a valid charge, but they say, oh, he's asked us to do this. Does he know how difficult it is to do this? The clerk would grumble. I've been asked to do this. He doesn't know it. He never worked as a... That argument would never hold good where I was concerned. They knew I had worked as a clerk. So from that point of view, the clerks who were working under me had a great deal of respect. And as far as the promotions were concerned, it helped me an enormous deal, Mutribo. You can't imagine how much. I knew, just as I have said, if I am going to be hurt, I shall be hurt. Through which body, mind, organism the hurt happens is truly irrelevant. Therefore, my question, if I am going to have a promotion, no one can stop it. On the other hand, if I were not going to get a promotion, licking the boots of anybody is not going to give me the promotion. Therefore, quite early in my career, I decided my job basically is from my papers which went from my table to the superior's table, from where his job began, my duty is to make his job, my superior's job, as easy as possible. Therefore, I started thinking, the papers, when I saw those papers, my idea was not to get rid of those papers. I would think in terms of my superior getting those papers and then doing his job. So I got into the habit of thinking of my work not from my point of view, but from the point of view of my superior when he gets my papers. The result was my superiors were always been very happy. More than that, I realized that if my superior had a difficult or tricky or ticklish problem, he would often ask my opinion. And I knew that he asked my opinion even if sometimes he had to divulge certain secrets about his boss, which he would otherwise not have done. But knowing me, he would say, "This is my problem. What would you do?" He asked me, I realized after a while, my boss asked me this question for only one reason. He knows that the answer or the solution I give will be the honest solution, and not because I would not give a solution which I know that he will like. Very often I would give him a solution which he didn't like. But curiously, many times he did follow my suggestion. So I had an excellent relationship with most of my superiors.
So what you're saying, Ramesh, is in your case, much of the understanding was there already. But on the day that you were translating for Maharaj, that
Yes.
you describe as the event of the understanding, what actually changed for you? What happened on that day?
What happened? That was the remarkable, and I knew that something had happened because I suddenly realized normally my translation would be, it had a process. I had to listen to what Maharaj said in Marathi. I had to understand what he said in Marathi. Then I had to translate it in English, which again depended on the extent of my vocabulary, which was good, there's no doubt about that. And then the translation would happen. In other words, until that morning, the translation was a process that was happening. But that morning, there was no process at all. The listening was spontaneous. The understanding in Marathi was spontaneous. The translation was spontaneous. And what I spoke was also totally spontaneous. In other words, the procedure of understanding in Marathi, translating in English, and then speaking, that process simply stopped. So that morning, it was totally spontaneous. And that spontaneity continued throughout.
Did you have any doubt that the event of the understanding had happened?
Not at all. For this reason, the very spontaneity of it convinced me that I was not doing it.
You've spoken about the understanding as the disappearance of the me.
Yes. Now, wait a minute. Disappearance of the me as the doer.
If
That will make no difference.
Right.
No mistake.
if the doer is gone,
Yes.
who is left
Yes.
to actually register the understanding that the understanding has taken place?
The ego, make no mistake. The ego as identification with this as a separate entity, make no mistake.
But can you go into this a little bit, Ramesh, because it's confusing to me.
Yes.
When you say the ego
Yes.
registers
Yeah.
that the understanding has happened,
Yes.
is it something standing outside of the understanding that
Yes.
goes?
Yes. The ego, let me put it this way. The ego thinks he has understood. But the understanding has happened. And the ego can only know that the understanding has happened. And that he is not the comprehender. You see? The ego can only understand that it has happened, but not that he has understood the self-realization or the understanding.
So what is understood?
The understanding has happened. And the ego is merely the vehicle, the instrument through which the translation has to happen. So the ego clearly realizes that it is only the instrument through which the translation is happening. So the understanding through the ego realizes it. But the realization itself is part of the spontaneity.
You talk about the process in a sage of witnessing.
Yes.
The sage witnessing the things that happen in his own body-mind in the same way that he would witness something happening in another body-mind.
Exactly, correct.
Can you link this witnessing to what you've just said about the ego and the understanding? How do those connect?
Precisely that's what happened. The understanding that was happening, the procedure being sort of transcended, the immediate spontaneous happening was witnessed.
And the witnessing was done by what? By whom?
That is the point. No one did the witnessing. But the ego had to realize that he had not done the translation. He had not done the witnessing. Witnessing is happening. Therefore, the big difference is in observing and witnessing is the ego observes. And because of the propensity in the programming, the ego cannot help observing, comparing and judging at the same time. The observing, comparing and judging happens as one block. But the witnessing being impersonal, there never even is a question, who is witnessing? Therefore, witnessing happens. Observing also happens. But the observing means an individual observer or individual comprehender who compares and judges. In the witnessing, there was no individual witnesser. Therefore, there was not even the slightest, have I understood what Maharaj is saying? There was no question of my understanding and then my giving the translation.
But by the same token, the sage does compare as his life continues to be lived through him.
Indeed.
So what is the difference between that comparison and the comparison you spoke about of the ordinary ego?
Another excellent concept. And this actually, the basis of this concept between the working mind and the thinking mind. So after the enlightenment has happened of self-realization, the sage ego still has to function in life. Therefore, the ego, just as there has to be an ego, there also has to be the working mind in the ego to deal with whatever work is being done to live his life. So what I am saying is, after self-realization happens, the ego remains, and that aspect of the mind which I have called working mind also remains. So what is destroyed? The happening of the enlightenment means the destruction of the sense of personal doership and what I have called the thinking mind. Thinking mind is the conceptualizing mind. The working mind of the sage is only concerned with the job at hand. The working mind is not concerned if the amount of time it has spent and the work that has been done, what result it will have for the individual entity, the working mind is just not concerned. Because the working mind is only in the moment. It is the thinking mind which dips into the past and projects something in the future.
And yet the working mind also has to go back into the past in order to learn from its past experience. What's the difference?
Quite correct. The working mind dips into the past experience in order to do the job at hand more, a better job. The working mind dips into the past merely to get his experience for the moment. Example, my dear. A surgeon, he has the body there, he has to make an incision. All this mind happens quickly, but nonetheless, he doesn't know where to put the incision. Then from the past he remembers that he put the decision somewhere which created a little problem for him. So now, based on his past experience, he decides in the moment where he is going to make the incision. What the thinking mind normally does is to keep interrupting the working mind. Every now and then, are you sure what you are doing is right? If you don't do this, what will happen? In the case of a surgeon, for instance, the working mind has made an incision and will proceed to do something. If the surgeon is not, he may be a really capable surgeon, but he is not the top surgeon, because unfortunately in his case, while he has the know-how, in his case, according to his destiny, the thinking mind keeps interrupting. For instance, the thinking mind will say, do you know whom you are operating on? He is a very influential man. Can you not imagine what will happen if you make a mess of it? Your career will be ruined. That is the thinking mind. But where, fortunately for this thinking mind is not there, he has decided where to, and then carries on with the job, and the job is finished. So in an average person, it is the thinking mind, by interrupting the working mind, reduces the efficiency of the working mind.
Ramesh, if you were to, I just want to stay with the feeling of the understanding, the feeling of enlightenment. If you were to give this feeling a description, this feeling some attributes, what would those attributes be, or what would that attribute be?
The sheer wonder of the happening. Sheer wonder of the happening with which I had nothing to do.
And what are you wondering at?
At the happening.
And what is that happening? What's wonderful about that happening?
The happening, the work that I thought I was doing, I wasn't doing. It was happening. The translation that I thought I was doing, I was not doing. The translation was happening. And I could only witness it, to use an active tense, with a tremendous sense of wonder. Something was happening and I was not doing it.
What is the barrier that exists between this live experience that you had and words? Why can words only reach so far?
Because the words can only describe something that is happening in the phenomenal world. But this happening transcends the phenomenal world. And the happening which transcends the phenomenal world, the words in the phenomenal world are simply not sufficient. Words in the phenomenal world can only describe what happens in the phenomenal world. But something that happens, a flash of understanding, and what I would like to point out, Matribo, is that this flash of understanding is not restricted to only the spiritual seeking. This flash of understanding can accept in any field at any point.
Can I just ask you to clarify that?
Yeah.
If we use the terms of self-realization, what you've just said is that self-realization can happen to any person, regardless or not of whether he's aware that that's what happened or whether he was a spiritual seeker.
Yes. But it is unlikely for something to happen unless he is a spiritual seeker. It could happen, but he would never know what has happened.
Right.
But my point is, a typical example is the case of the British mathematician and physicist Fred Hoyle. I read his own account. And then someone sent me about also Fred Hoyle, another incident. Same thing happened. In this case, he had to read a paper at a physicist's conference in Paris. He had reached a stage in his paper where he was stuck. He simply couldn't penetrate that impasse. And then in his words, while he was crossing a busy street in Paris, what I'm saying is, he was not meditating on it. He was crossing a busy street in Paris, and the solution flashed in his mind. The solution flashed. And there was such certainty about that flash that according to him, he did not have to rush somewhere to get a paper and ink and to write it down. The flash was total. So he says he went on his way, he was on his way to a dinner. So he went to the dinner, made his after dinner sounds, came home to the hot hotel, and then quite comfortably, he said, he wrote down the answer, which took him 20 minutes. So something which took him 20 minutes to explain in the phenomenal world had happened in a flash. So Mutriba, what I would like to mention here is, there are several concepts, I repeat, concepts, which I have had to arrive at myself.
Right.
You see. Right. One of the basic concepts I have is about the ego. What is the ego? So I had to say the ego has two aspects. Basically, the ego is identification with a particular body, mind, organism, and then as a separate entity brought about by the traditional word Maya, I say divine hypnosis. Divine hypnosis is necessary for the life as we know it to happen, which is based on interconnected human relationships. But in that ego, therefore, it is basically identification. But the more for interhuman relationships to happen, mere separation as an entity wouldn't work. Right. So the sense of personal doership had to be infused in that ego. Right. And generally, for some reason, ego has been understood as the ego doer, and that's why kill the ego. So I had to make a distinction between the ego as mere identification, merely as the framework, and doing as the real core of the ego. That's one part of it. Again, the seeker, spiritual seeker, there again I had to understand for myself, there is truly no spiritual seeker. There is seeking which happens. And not only seeking for spiritual seeking, any kind of seeking, seeker arrives later. What is really happening is seeking. Then the ego as an entity with a doership. Then what I am saying is that my concept is, it is possible for the ego to live its life without the sense of personal doership. There, in many ways, there is the confusion. If I am not the doer, how can the world function? The world functions because, which is true. But my point is, it is possible for the spiritual seeker, after realization or during the process, to live his life as a separate entity without the sense of personal doership. Something like, it is possible for a human being to live with his appendix removed.
Right. There's an old Zen story, Ramesh, that I'm sure you've heard, about a disciple asking the master what he did before enlightenment, and he said he chopped wood and carried water.
Yeah.
And then the disciple said, "What do you do now?" He said, "I do the same thing."
Yes.
Can you explain that story?
Yes. Therefore, the disciple really said, what are you doing now? I chop wood and carry water. His understanding is that chopping wood and carrying water was happening before. I didn't know it. Now I know that I am not chopping wood. Chopping wood happens. But as far as the world is concerned, what is chopping of wood is happening. The world is concerned, chopping of wood and carrying of water.
And also, it seems to me the story points to the fact that the understanding actually doesn't change much in the person's life. His life continues as before.
I've said it so many times, you see. Do not expect the final understanding to change your life in any way. Your life will continue to happen strictly according to the cosmic law and your destiny. Whether there is understanding in a body, mind, organism or not, life is not affected. Therefore, the life for the sage before he became the sage and life for the sage after he became the sage would still happen according to the destiny of the body, mind, organism. The only change is in the individual's attitude to life. Life continues. In what I am saying is the other way around. In someone's case, no enlightenment. Life could be changed for the better. In another case, enlightenment has happened, life could be worse. So that whether the life is for the better or worse, that has no connection with whether the understanding has happened or not.
So the seeker, the spiritual seeker, can't expect the understanding to bring him perfection.
That is my point.
Can he expect the understanding to bring him compassion?
It can happen. In other words, the compassion happens because of the understanding. No one is a doer. Someone suffers because he thinks he did something which he should not have done. The other person suffers because of his lack of understanding. When the sage sees the other person suffering, compassion arises because of his understanding. He is suffering unnecessarily. There is no reason for him to feel guilt or shame. He didn't do it. So his understanding and the absence of understanding in the other, the presence of understanding brings about a sense of compassion for the other, which if the understanding was not there, compassion wouldn't have been there.
So are there any common characteristics that can be noticed in the behavior of different sages after the understanding has taken place? Is there any common thread in terms of behavior,
Yes.
in terms of how they live their lives, what they do, what they say?
Absolutely none. Absolutely none. Because what we say, the behavior of a sage has never been his behavior. What we call behavior is truly reaction in the body-mind organism to something outside, to which one of the senses responds. Eye sees something, the ear hears something, the nose smells something, the tongue tastes something, the fingers touch something. Immediately there is a reaction in the body-mind organism. And that reaction depends entirely on the genes and up-to-date conditioning. And that we unfortunately call as the sage's behavior.
Ramesh, if the truth is one,
Yes.
why is it that so many sages disagree when they speak? Why is it that someone like George Gurdjieff can be living in the same era as Ramana Maharshi and yet have recommendations and instructions and advice for his followers that is completely opposite? If the truth is one, how does that process happen?
Because what they are saying is not the truth. What they are saying is not the truth. So what Ramana Maharshi said and what Gurdjieff said, different concepts. Both are concepts. That's my point. Therefore, whatever any sage has ever said is a concept. So the difference, not the truth is different, concepts are different, and the truth is only one, which is all there is consciousness, manifest or unmanifest, potential energy or activized energy. That is the only truth. I am. The impersonal awareness is the only truth. So what you said, Gurdjieff is talking about the truth according to his concept. Ramana Maharshi is talking about the truth with his concepts.
This talking about the truth, how much of its relevance is connected to the place and time in which it happens? You often quote reported words from Buddha, you quote Ramana. How much does the expression of the truth and its effectiveness depend on its connection to its context, its particular geographical context, its particular historical context?
See, the Buddha's concept, most people, including the Buddhists, thought it was too simple, and therefore it needed interpretation. The basic tenets of the Buddha you could put down very shortly. But the amount of writing on Buddhism, enormous tomes have been written. Therefore, the Buddha's concept of the truth has been enlarged to millions of words of interpretation. So, the concept itself, therefore, if you want to go to the original concept, and more likelihood of your understanding the original concept than the various interpretations. That is the point.
You often speak of Ramana with the highest regard.
Yes.
You always put him forward as an example of maybe a perfect sage.
Yes.
Is there any higher...
Perfect sage, not a perfect man.
No, perfect sage.
Let's be.
Is there any hierarchy in enlightenment? Is there more enlightenment or less enlightenment?
Not at all. Not at all. But the point is, what is enlightenment is a concept. So if the same concept is used, no difference. So if by using my concept, total acceptance, no one is a doer.
So when you speak so highly of Ramana, is it his concept that you're speaking so highly of?
I'm speaking of the concept as expressed by Ramana Maharshi of the truth,
Right.
which is the same thing.
Right.
And there again, see, as soon as you use words, words have implications. Implication means problem. And the biggest problem in Ramana Maharshi's teaching is the English language and the Tamil language. In Tamil, he says, self-inquiry is, who am I? That's what. So ever since then it has been, who am I? What he really meant was, who is this me? In Tamil, there is no word like that. So he had to use the word, who am I? That is the individual me. And to refer to the source, he had to use the word I in Tamil. So, but that he uses I for the source is not easily remembered. Who am I? I mean, who am I as the source? That is not so. So that is my understanding of who am I is who is this me? And I go a step further, and my concept is who is this me who thinks he is the doer? And that is also undoubtedly was what Ramana Maharshi meant.
Last question for today, Ramesh.
Sure.
If I were to ask you for an ironclad guarantee,
Yes.
an ironclad guarantee of what this body-mind could reasonably expect from the event of the understanding, what would that be?
To be anchored in peace and harmony, which means never to hate yourself for anything, never to hate anybody else for anything, which means always to be comfortable with yourself, comfortable with others. In other words, unless the frown on your forehead is physical, it won't happen. There will be no frown on your forehead. The frown on the forehead represents discomfort either with yourself or with someone else. Now, what I am saying, if there is a physical pain, pain may be there, but not not the creases on your temple. Your whole face may be ready to cry out in pain. For me, the clearest example of the happening of the total understanding is you be with a sage as long as you want. And what you realize is he is never ever uncomfortable with himself. He is never uncomfortable with others. That is the sage is never uncomfortable with himself. Sage is never uncomfortable with others. And that is why, if the sage is never uncomfortable with others, the others are not uncomfortable with the sage. That's why they are drawn to the sage.
Okay, Ramesh. Thank you very much.
Okay.
May your form be in my heart and your name on my lips. May your form be in my heart and your name on my lips. May your form be in my heart and your name on my lips. May your form be in my heart and your name on my lips. तुझे रूप चित्ते रहो, मुझे तुझे नामा. तुझे रूप चित्ते रहो, मुझे तुझे नामा. देह प्रपंचाच्या दासं, सुखे करो कामा. सुखे करो कामा. तुझे रूप चित्ते